Hello, Brian. Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Eric. How are you?
Yeah, doing just fine. So, continuing on with our series, I think this would be episode 10. And we're going to talk about some subject matter that we hear a lot about, and we know there's a lot of confusion about in the market, and that's related to crystals and the different uses or types of crystals and other options. Would you like to take us through it?
Sure. Well, Eric, most microdermabrators suck. Well, what I mean is most microdermabrators are designed to pull crystals through the device, through a handpiece, across the skin to gently abrade the skin surface. And that takes with it the dead skin tissue and the oils and the debris that can dull the skin over time and clog pores. Actually, I should mention that some of the early microdermabrasion devices actually sprayed crystals across the skin with technology that's similar to the sandblasters that you might hear about out there. And these devices they were cheaper and they were available on the market, but they turned out to be pretty darn messy, spraying crystals all over the room. So I mention that because I understand there are a few manufacturers that may be bringing these spray-type microdermabrasion devices back to the market, and just keep your eyes open for those.
Right.
So over the years, manufacturers have tried to differentiate their microdermabrasion devices by using different crystals. We've seen aluminum oxide, also known as corundum, which is a form of ruby. We see microdermabrators that have used salt or sodium bicarbonate. There's even a machine on the market for years, still maybe, that sprayed walnut husks. I think the manufacturers were really looking for that organic label for their crystals.
Right. What's next? Tree bark?
I'm sure they'll see just about everything over time. The ideal microdermabrasion crystal is very hard, so it doesn't fracture when it's going through the unit. And or when it impacts the skin. Generally, it should have a very consistent size and shape, and that allows, as we mentioned in earlier videos, air to pass through the crystals, carry them through the airstream, and distribute that evenly. And it allows for a more consistent treatment so that the crystals are doing the same thing every time they impact the skin. An ideal microdermabrasion crystal is dry. If these crystals have any moisture in them, they tend to clump, and that results in clogging problems or inconsistent crystal flow through the devices. And I think one of the more important things is they shouldn't be soluble in water. A lot of crystals that back to salt and sodium bicarbonate, when the crystals impact the skin, they can be absorbed into the skin and affect skin chemistry. And that can lead to all kinds of problems, cause irritation, swelling, or worse. So, you really got to keep your eye out for those types of things with the crystals.
Yeah, those are considerations we haven't heard a lot about from our customers, and one would have to presume because we got that engineered out. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I mean, for the reasons above, we've really determined that aluminum oxide, also known as corundum, which is a form of ruby, is the ideal microdermabrasion crystal. Even though it has aluminum in the name, there's no aluminum in aluminum oxide. It's a crystal that grows on and around aluminum. Aluminum oxide is one of the hardest materials on Earth. It's rated as a Mo 9, and Mo is the way they rate hardness in crystals. A diamond, as an example, is rated Mo 10, and you know how hard diamonds are. Because it's so hard, that means it doesn't fracture as it goes through the machine. And as I mentioned, aluminum oxide is not water soluble. It's a natural crystal, and it's not going to have any effect on the skin chemistry. What's interesting, though, is there's significant variances even in aluminum oxide that's sold on the marketplace. It depends on where the crystal is mined and how it's packaged. A lot of the aluminum oxide crystals on the market these days are mined in Asia. They're less expensive, as in everything that comes from Asia, But you run into problems. You find very high moisture content. A lot of those crystals can be up to, almost 2 or 3% moisture. They can contain high levels of impurities, including water-soluble contaminants, and we discussed that earlier. And they contain high levels of dust and fine particles. And as we've mentioned, that dust and fine particles tends to pack between the crystals and cause clogging problems. Aluminum oxide crystals are usually sold in 2 primary sizes, measured at 110 microns and 120 microns. A micron is a millionth of a meter. So you can imagine those are pretty tiny crystals. When crystals are measured in microns, the larger the measurement, the larger the crystal. In the marketplace, you also see crystals sold by grit size. Grit is an old measurement that they use for sandpaper. And grit, when you see a grit measurement, that means how many of those little particles will fit in a square, a standardized square on a piece of sandpaper, as an example. So a lot of manufacturers you'll see will confuse micron and grit. And they'll tell you they're selling you 110 or 120 grit crystals, when in actuality, if they were, that would mean almost the particle size would be 160 or 200 microns, or almost double the size of most microdermabrasion crystals. So be very careful when you're looking for microdermabrasion crystals that you follow the manufacturer's lead. But generally, the ideal crystal size is between 110 and 120 microns. And in general, the larger the crystal, the more aggressive the procedure.
Got it. Well, that's quite a lot to get your head around there. So let me try to summarize. It's inverted then, right? So we've got the larger the grit, the higher the actual measurement of that grit with the microns. Is that the way to think about it?
Actually, I confused even you, Eric. I think it's the opposite. So,
well, I said it the reverse. That's right. So it's the lower the higher the grit, the lower the micron measurement.
That's right, because you got to think of it when they're measuring grit, it's how many of those little particles will fit in, say, in a square centimeter. So in micron is actually a size. That's a thousandth of a meter. So the more microns, the bigger the particle. The more grit, the more particles will fit in that little square. So you're right. It's an inverse relationship.
Okay. And I just said it wrong the first time. Yeah. Okay. Well, good. So let's hopefully that's clear to the folks out there. Ultimately, follow your manufacturing guidelines. And for the Dermaglow, how does that equate?
Well, again, we use 120 micron aluminum oxide crystals. We found that to be the ideal crystal for the use. But a couple other things you need to look out for with microdermabrasion crystals that are very important is the way they're packaged. When you find microdermabrasion crystals out in the marketplace, you'll see them packaged in bags. That's one of the lower cost methods of purchasing crystals. You'll see them packaged in wide mouth jars, buckets, and pails, all the way up to 25-pound pails of crystals. And probably more commonly in various sizes and shapes of bottles, up to 32, 40-ounce type bottles. Just to give you some features and benefits of the different packaging and what you'd look out for there, is if you think about it, in a bag, they're usually 4 or 5 pounds in those bags. If most microdermabrasion devices have small little crystal canisters with a tiny little hole to pour those crystals in. So you buy your crystals in a bag. As soon as you open that bag, first thing that's going to happen is that's going to expose those crystals to moisture. And you're trying to pour those crystals into your little crystal canister, and that's problematic. So in general, I would suggest you stay away from crystals packaged in bags. They're messy. As they sit around, they're attracting moisture. Second option were those wide mouth jars, buckets, and pails. Again, you order a 25-pound bucket of crystals, you may as well have a forklift there to move it around. That's not very convenient. They're hard to pour, hard to carry, And again, just like bags, once you've opened that canister, that large canister, they're exposed to moisture, and we know that the spa environment is a high moisture environment. So I highly recommend, when you're looking for crystals, look for convenient sized bottles of crystals.
Okay, well, that makes good sense. And the way we package our crystals is in the canister, a sealed canister that's easily, or a sealed bottle that's easily put into the canister that ultimately is going to only have a very short window for moisture, if any at all.
Right. The Dermaglow is actually even engineered a little differently than that, because the bottles we sell in come with a little pop top. So you pop that top, you drop the Dermaglow bottle as is right in our the Dermaglow 2 receiver, and you never have to pour the crystals between the bottle and the cartridge. So that keeps the crystals from being exposed to moisture, and allows for easy storage and ease of use when you're adding a new bottle of crystals. So at Dermaglow, we have 99.6% natural, pure aluminum oxide corundum ruby crystals. They're sourced from Austria, not Asia, so that gives them a low moisture content, high purity. They're milled to be very uniform in size and shape, and we've talked about that, so that gives you consistent treatment and reduces the clogging. You get very little, if no, dust and contaminants. And as we mentioned, they're packed in their 4-pound bottles to minimize exposure to moisture in the spa environment. So, it's one thing to keep in mind when you're having problems with your microdermabrasion unit, no matter whose unit you have, is to consider crystals first. Try a high quality crystal before you give up on your microdermabrasion machine. That might mean that you have to vacuum out the existing crystals first, but crystals really can make a difference. And as you've heard, there's a lot to that purchasing decision.
Good. Well, I guess there's a few takeaways here. And so, crystals, clearly impact the, performance of the machine over time, reducing clogging with higher quality crystals, a better result with the treatment on the client, and ultimately it's a good indicator with the manufacturer and their determination of what crystals would be appropriate to tell you something about the quality of that machine as well.
Makes sense.
Good. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in here. And again, like, subscribe, comment, let us know what else we can, introduce to you on the program and help you within your practice and grow in your business. Thanks again. Talk soon.